TorahCafe.com.
Eva, let me begin by thanking you so much for taking the time to be here tonight on the eve of Yom HaShoah and to share with us all your life experience. And I suppose it only makes sense to start very much from the beginning, if we may, going back to your early childhood, before all the chaos. You were a young, innocent girl, though I believe you traveled quite a bit, growing up in Vienna, moving to Belgium, and then eventually settling in Amsterdam. So please take us through that a little bit.
Well, I was born in 1929 in Vienna, which was a beautiful city and with a big Jewish population, but we didn't really feel any anti-Semitism. My parents had many friends, Jewish, non-Jewish friends, and they went on outings. We had a really very nice life. I had a brother who was 3 years older, I had cousins, and life seemed to be good till really it started to change completely till 1938, when the Nazis marched in and were welcomed by the Austrian population. This was really a big shock for everybody, because it looked as if they wouldn't be welcome. Austria really wanted to stay independent, but suddenly when Hitler just marched in, everybody welcomed him. But not everybody, not the Jewish people, but the Austrian population. They stood in the streets with banners. Every window had the big flags with a swastika, and measures against the Jewish people started to come immediately, and they were even more vicious than in Germany.
Now, you knew Anne Frank already as a child, I think around about the age of 11 or so. I think you were more the shy type, she was more the extrovert. Can you tell us a little bit about when you met, how you met, and generally about your friendship?
Well, we were lucky enough to get out of Austria. Many of our family members couldn't and didn't, and we never heard from them anymore. We had to go through Belgium, and eventually we ended up in Holland. Through Belgium, it was a very bad experience. The Belgian people didn't want refugees, and not Jewish refugees. I didn't speak the language. I had a lot of problems, and so but eventually we ended up in Amsterdam in February 1940, and the Dutch people were quite different, welcomed Jewish people. Everybody wanted to be my best friend, and it was really, I felt as if my life is going to get better again. And we lived on the Merwedeplein. It was a big, rather new square, and with some refugees there and lots of children. And after school, all the children went out to play in the street. And one day, another little girl came to me and introduced herself, and her name was Anne Frank. And she took me to her apartment. I met her family, her father, her mother, and her sister. And we were friends, but not... she wasn't one of my best friends. I was really a childish child. I liked to play marbles and skipping and fool around on the bicycle. Anne was already much more grown up in a way. We were only 11, but she was already interested in fashion, in film stars, which for me came actually much later, and as well in boys. Well, I had a brother, so boys were no mystery for me. She just had a sister, and she was really quite a big flirt already. And she was very interested that her hair was always looking nice and all that. And so we played together, but as I say, we were not best friends. But there were big crowds of groups of kids, and we were always together. And the first few months were wonderful, but in May the German army marched into Holland as well. So it was a very short war, just 5 days, and we were stuck. We tried still to escape to England, but the last ship had gone up, little boats, and we went back to our apartment and realized now there's no way out anymore. In the meantime, of course, the war had started already. In 1939, England and France had declared war on Germany, and there was actually no fighting because there was no border yet. But we knew that there was no way out, we couldn't go anywhere.
Did you know that she had a diary, that she kept a diary, that she had, but it was apparent, quite an exceptional writing skill? Were you aware of that in any way?
Not at first, you know, because she only got it on her 13th birthday, so it was in 1942, and that was really when both families went into hiding. Because, you know, the measures against the Jewish people were slow coming, not like in Austria, but in 1942, in the summer, many, many young people, my brother and Anna's sister Margot, got call-up notices to be deported to Germany to work camp. And that was the time when many parents didn't send their children, but went into hiding. Some, of course, didn't know how to go into hiding. It was not so easy. You had to make contact, you must know where to go, you had to be in touch with the resistance. So many parents did send their young people. And of course we didn't hear anything till after the war. Those young people were not sent to Germany to work, but they were sent to Mauthausen, and they were just thrown down from the cliffs. And the Dutch have a very big monument for the early young people who perished there in this horrific camp. But we went into hiding like the Frank family. We didn't know from each other. Everybody kept it very quiet because, you know, the Dutch were great, but nevertheless there was still a big Nazi party like everywhere else in Europe. Those were people who thought perhaps Nazis will win the war. It looked like this at first. They will get better jobs. Some were perhaps anti-Semitic. Some were just right-wing people. So you didn't know who to trust. So everything had to be done very secretly. But there was a big resistance movement. Those people blew up trains, shot particular bad Nazis, printed ration cards, made false ID cards, had their own newspaper, all kind of activities. And my father, obviously, he didn't tell us that, had been in touch with people like this, and they found us safe homes. But we couldn't go into hiding together. My mother and me went to one hiding place and my father and brother to a different place because, you know, the apartments are quite small and so nobody wanted to take 4 people. Some people went into the country, especially children on farms, but for adults it was difficult.
Are you amazed as to the extent that she became such a phenomenon, that her diary suddenly became so worldwide that there's a museum for her, etc.? Did that come to you as a surprise, knowing her as you did?
Yes, I certainly didn't expect it, nor did her father, nor did really anybody. When Otto published it, you know, they had 1,500 copies, and people said, well, who will be interested? But it became a bestseller in 1952 when it was published in America. And it had several reasons, because when I came back from Auschwitz, I was desperately to talk about my experience, but people didn't want to know. They said, you know, we all have suffered, it was terrible, but let's just move on. So I had to suppress it, but a bit later on, people started to be curious and wanting to know. And the diary, so it's about this period, but it's not Holocaust literature. And people were ready only to read that much. If Elie Wiesel would have published his book Night, nobody would have bought it or read it. And even when he did publish it, I think in late 70, it wasn't a bestseller for many, many, many years. People didn't want to know.
Did you and Anne ever actually talk about what was going on around you? I mean, you couldn't go out after 8 o'clock at night. You couldn't go to the cinema. How aware were you before the storm clouds really started to gather?
Oh, we did know, but somehow, you know, because the Dutch people said, don't worry, we are going to protect you. And they did try very, very hard. When it was in 41, when we had already wear the yellow star, they rounded up about 10,000 men in the city, men and boys, and they were deported. And there was a general strike in Holland. Nothing functioned anymore. And So that the Dutch thought the Germans will free those people, but instead they took hostages from the street, innocent Christian people, and said, if you're not going to go back to work, we are going to start shooting those people. So of course they went back to work. So it was very, very difficult to resist successfully.
And then of course the full invasion came. You were young. I suppose it's fair to say you were forced to grow up very quickly. When reality really started to hit, how afraid were you?
Well, people say they didn't know about it, and did you know about it? And the Germans say they didn't know anything about it. But the BBC actually then broadcast out where we were in hiding. You were not allowed to listen to foreign broadcasts, but people did, of course. And where we were hiding, people had little radios hidden in a cupboard, and we put it on very softly, and we were really glued to it because it gave the news how the battles were going, especially in 43 when things were getting already a bit better. The Germans were losing already the war in Africa. In Russia things wasn't going so well. But they always said there are death camps in Germany and Poland where Jewish people are being gassed. So we knew what really was going on.
You mentioned before about being in hiding. Can you tell us a little bit about when you were hidden? Do you remember the moment you were taken into hiding? How long had you in fact been in hiding? What was your foster family like?
Well, we had to change several hiding places because let's say this call-up notice for the young people, there were 10,000, only 5,000 turned up, so the new people had disappeared, and they were looking for them. They really didn't want anybody to get away. So we had house searches. So at night, they came with trucks, knocked on doors, people had to open, had to let them in and search their homes. So we had to have a hiding place within the hiding place. So at night we quickly went into this, hoping they wouldn't find us. But rumors had been spread, and we heard stories that when they came at night, they felt the beds, which were still warm, so they realized people were hiding there. So they demolished the whole apartment till they found the people. And the people the Christian who hid us were of course arrested as well. And so people became scarce and said, we have to move to a different place. So we were perhaps in about 7 different hiding places.
And have any of them survived? Were you ever in touch with any of those foster families after the war?
Yes. Yeah, we especially because my mother stayed in Holland longer than I did. She knew them, and we visited them, and certainly, yes.
I'm actually the son of one of the hidden children, my mother having been hidden by a priest for 2.5 years, also in Holland.
Also in Holland, right.
And I'm wondering how would you actually describe, what words would you use to capture an image of such valiant people who risked their lives to hide Jewish children or families?
Or families. Well, you mustn't forget that the Dutch hated the Germans, that overrun their country. And as well, they took people, Christian young men, to work in Germany. So it was really the enemy. So of course, many people were fighting them in their own country. So, but it was, of course, very, very brave of people to risk their own life to help other human beings.
Now, this may be a painful question, but can you tell us a little bit about that moment when you were caught, when you were rounded up, that moment that you were found and put onto the trains?
Tell you about how it was, why we were betrayed and arrested. My father and brother were staying in the country, and the woman, after 2 years having been that happened in May 1944, the woman started to blackmail them for more money. And my father didn't have much left after having 2 years being in hiding. He had some jewelry which he sold through the resistance, but there wasn't much left. And so my father phoned my mother, we were in Amsterdam, and said, please get in touch with the resistance and find a new hiding place for us. But it was difficult in 1944 to find safe places. Many people had gone into hiding, even Dutch people who were picked up, from young men who were picked up to work in Germany. Many people didn't want to take anymore, were scared. Many people had been arrested. So it took several weeks till my mother found, through the resistance, a Dutch nurse came forward, said she knows a safe house in Amsterdam. And my father and brother escaped from this woman at night and met this nurse in Amsterdam, and she took them to this safe house, which was actually a trap, because the nurse was a double agent. And so it was actually, the hiding place was very near where we were, and on the Sunday morning we went to visit my father and brother. And they followed us, and that's why all 4 of us were arrested.
Wow. Do you remember that moment that you were taken to that train?
It just happened to be my 15th birthday, so 11th of May, so that's something I will always remember. And we were taken to a local prison, then we were interrogated, and especially me, because they thought I can give them the names and help people who had helped us. They thought for me they will get information out. But luckily I knew the people, but I didn't know their real name or where they lived, so I couldn't betray anybody. But they beat me and they threatened they would kill my brother if I wouldn't give them information. But eventually they realized that I really didn't know anything. But you know, at this moment, at this time, we really thought that will be very soon the end of our lives. Especially if you had been in hiding, you got the S for Strafe, punishment, on your papers. And so even worse treatment, if you can imagine that.
And then
we went to Westerbork, which was a holding camp, and there were, I mean, they didn't just kill Jewish people, they killed gypsies, Jehovah's Witnesses, communists, disabled people, all different groups, but the Jewish people were of course the biggest. But in Westerbork they had rounded up some gypsies. There were a group of 500 gypsies, and they wanted to get rid of those. So we got there on a Wednesday, and on Friday we were already on a list to be transported to the east.
And when you're on this train, what's going through your mind? Do you know where you're going? What was the train condition like?
It was cattle trucks, of course. There were practically no room to sit, no air. It was May, it was a very hot day. There were just 2 buckets, one with water, one for toilet facilities. The doors were only opened once a day, and bread was thrown in like wild animals. And but that was really the last time I was together with my father and brother. And in the train, my brother told me before they left this house where they were run away, he had hid his paintings under the floorboards. And he said, after the war, I'm going to get them back.
I'd like to come back to those paintings in a minute, which of course are with us here today. There was a moment, wasn't there, when, as I read, your father apologized to you all. He felt bad that he was no longer able to protect you. Do you remember that moment?
I remember that very clearly. My father was a wonderful family man, and you know, he had protected us till then, but at that moment he realized he won't be able to do anything for us. And he must have felt very, very bad about that. And he apologized. He said, I got you out of Austria. I got you a good hiding place. 2 years we were safe. But now I can't do anything anymore. And he told us to keep, wash our hands always and keep clean and be kind and never lose our humanity. But later, when I saw the condition in Auschwitz, I thought, well, he had no idea what was going to happen. But you know, we knew actually we were going to be killed, but nevertheless, you pretend life will go on.
Sort of going into a
so it's sort of, yeah, self-protection in a way.
And can you share with us what it was like when you first stepped off the train and what happened from there? Well,
eventually we arrived, and The doors were open, it was a beautiful day, and we jumped down and the fresh air was wonderful, but then we saw the sign on the platform, Auschwitz, Auschwitzim. Because it was a little Polish town, it was not in the wilderness, people around saw what was happening. And the next command was men to different parts. So this is when we had to say goodbye. Everybody had to separate from their family. And that was, of course, a very hard and emotional scene. But the Germans stood there beating us with dogs, and Mengele, Dr. Mengele, a proper medical doctor, stood there immaculately dressed, polished boots, white gloves, and with a little stick like a conductor, and he conducted who was going to live and who was going to die. So the women were separated, all the young children, and even bigger children and older people were taken to one side and the others were taken to another side. At that time, of course, we didn't know what those two sides meant.
And you're only 15 at the time.
Yeah.
And what's going through your mind? What are you thinking?
Well, we thought that will be our last moment on earth, definitely, definitely.
Was there ever a moment when you felt total despair, you just really wanted to give up?
It wasn't despair, it was just, in a way, it was more acceptance. Because, you know, through this journey, we had been already kind of numb, and all your normal feelings had sort of, you know, you didn't feel like you would just have been walking outside in the air and been playing, and suddenly you were confronting death. You were already sort of prepared, it is going to happen.
And what was your understanding? I presume you would have seen the gas chambers.
Not at that time. Then, so my mother and me got to, obviously, to the good side, and we walked into the camp, and in a big barrack, and we had to undress completely naked, and all our hair was shaved, we were tattooed, we were registered, and while this was going on, the capos, those were really the people who run the camp, told us, the family you had been separated with, they were told they were going to a shower, but they went, they thought this relief to wash after this terrible journey, and they stood there was a barrack with pipes and shower heads, and they really waited for water to come down, but nothing happened. And they started to feel faint, couldn't breathe anymore, and within a few minutes they fell to the floor because this poisonous gas was entered. And within 10 minutes everybody had collapsed and was dead. And they told us that with much pleasure. And you can imagine a mother who had just given up her child, how people felt. So that was a horrible moment, being confronted with what happened and what probably will happen to us. And at that moment we really thought, well, it is what will happen to us as well. And so they said, now it's your turn to go in the shower. So we didn't want to go, and they beat us into it. And I remember clinging to my mother, and we stood there, and water came. So, you know, this was, of course, a wonderful relief, but we still didn't know what will happen in the future. It was still very, very, very insecure and terrible.
When did you become aware of what happened to your father and your brother? I presume you'd never seen them again since you were separated at that point?
A couple of miracles happened. I saw my father several times. I never ever saw my brother again. My father through, well, I don't know, he was able to, first I saw him once through the fence working, and then later he came to even see me particularly. He had permission from his boss to come and see me. This was something, I still don't know how he knew where I was, how he was able to come, but my father was a really a wonderful, charming man, and even he must have just had a way to get out, and I don't know, this is something I'll never know.
Judging from the calculation of what you told us before, I guess you will very soon, on the 11th of May, be celebrating your 83rd birthday. And I should stress, you don't look it.
Well, in May, yeah. Coming May, I'll be 83, yes.
Do you think of yourself lucky to survive and to be alive?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I know there exists survivor's guilt, but I must say I haven't got that. Had after a long time of difficulties, because, you know, it wasn't easy to put your life together after the war. That is something people don't always realize, especially when we were liberated in January, which was by the Russians, which was our luck, because I would certainly not have made it till the end of the war. And eventually we came back to Amsterdam. We traveled for 6 months after January till we came back in June to Amsterdam again, and there we waited for news of our family. And when that came, a letter from the Red Cross said both my father and brother had perished in Mauthausen, several days before the American army came to liberate that camp. Well, this was really like a death blow to us. You know, over the years I could forget my own suffering and the degradation and all that, but the loss is something you'll just never accept and never get over.
And how did you actually rebuild your life? How did you get over the trauma, if in fact you ever...
Well, like I said, I wanted to talk about it. Nobody wanted to hear. The counseling didn't exist. So you had to just try to live with it, which was very, very difficult, really difficult. I was full of hatred, didn't trust anybody, and not only the Germans, really the whole world, because I realized, you know, America, Canada, Australia could have easily accepted more Jews and didn't. So I felt really very resentful against everybody.
And apart from these sort of gatherings, excuse me, do you ever find, even still till today, when you're in your own quiet corner, minding your own business, in your own home, thinking back to your experiences?
Definitely. It's something which will always live with you. And not just when I do nothing, but you know, you hear, you read an article in the paper, you see something on television, you read a book. You know, it is something, it's still very, very much with us. It's, you know, it's long ago. For the young people it seemed a lifetime, but for me it seems not that long ago, really.
How did you feel about your mother, in effect, marrying your friend Anne Frank's father at a later point in time?
Well, Otto came very often to our house. First he tried to find out what had happened to his family, and then of course he got the devastating news as well that his whole family had perished. He was 57 years old at the time, and after he left, I sat on my mother's lap and we cried, and my mother said, well, at least we have each other, but this poor man, what has he got to live for? And then a few days later he came again with a little brown parcel, and he opened it very, very carefully, and it was Anne's diary. And that really gave him a purpose in life, and he always said, I feel as if my little girl is still with me. And he wasn't quite sure to publish it, you know, but eventually he did, and it was a good thing. And so he came very often to talk to my mother and help me as well. He who had lost everything, and he said, and I was really very full of hatred, and he said, you know, if you go through your life hating people, the people you hate don't know, but you will be miserable. And which is true, you know. And so I said, you know, there are some wonderful people around. Look at Miep Gies and some other people. And so slowly I realized, but I went to school, I couldn't relate to my classmates, I found I was an adult. So it was really very, very difficult. But Otto came regularly, and they went together to form a new synagogue, and they went to lectures together, and Otto talked to my mother about where he's going to publish the book, and my mother helped him, and he helped my mother as well. She had to get a job, and so they became good friends. And when I finished school, I didn't really care what I was going to do. And Otto and my mother decided I should become a photographer. And because I was quite artistic, I didn't want to study anymore. And I said, okay. And so Otto gave me his camera because he was a very good photographer, a Leica. And he said, well, this is a camera, I hope you'll be very successful with it. And he knew somebody in England who had a photographic studio. And I became an apprentice here in Woburn Place, actually. And I lived in a little boarding house in Cricklewood, where there were some other young people, and there was a young man from Israel to study economics. And at that time, it was in 1951, you earned perhaps £2, 10 shillings, didn't have much money, and it was difficult to make friends with English people, you know, we were bloody foreigners. And so I went with this Israeli boy, we went for long walks on Hampstead Heath, and we talked, but both of us didn't tell each other what happened in our life before us. He didn't tell me he came from Germany and what happened to him, and I didn't tell him I was in a camp or anything. Because at first, when I wanted to talk, nobody wanted to hear, and later I suppressed it and I just didn't want to talk about it. And so after about 6 months, he said to me, Eva, I've fallen in love with you, let's get married and start a new life in Israel. And I said, no thank you, because I've got a widowed mother at home, and after this year is over, I'm going to go back to Amsterdam. And then Otto Frank came over one day because he had business here as well, and I told him that, and he said, well, your mother and me have fallen in love as well, and when you get settled, we like to get married. So this is what happened. We got married in 1952, and they got married in 1953. And they were married for 27 years, longer than they were married with their first spouses. And I've never seen a happier marriage. Both had lost their first family, both understood each other, and they worked together on the publishing of the diary. They got thousands of letters from people who had read the diary from all over the world. They met many friends, they traveled around, and had a very meaningful life. And we have 3 daughters who became Otto's grandchildren, so he had again a family. So that is
Now let's go back to your brother, because we have magnificent artwork over here. Am I mistaken to assume he was approximately about 17 years old?
16 years old.
16 years old, he was actually able to draw these magnificent pieces. Can you tell us a little bit about your brother, how these artworks were found?
He was actually a musician. He was very musical, he could compose, he could play any instrument, but of course in hiding he had to be quiet. So to pass the time, my father and he decided they would start painting. And again, you know, he had talents, he was a real artist in every field. And he started to paint. He had never done this oil painting, and he sat in a little room, never saw anything like that, and he created, we have got actually 30 paintings, all completely different. At first he started more with still lifes to try to get the material like velvet and glass and copper, but then he started to do interiors with figures, complicated things. And this one there, it's him. He always imagined him studying everywhere, books around the globe. And there's a little calendar with 11. So when he painted it, he thought of my birthday. That other one there, he told me, he's a farm worker. He comes in, and next to him is a beer and a piece of bread, and he realized his mother had died in the alcove. You see something white there in the alcove, and he puts his head down and cries. He was very, very much afraid of dying. And this is how I wrote my second book, The Promise. When he was 12 years old, he heard already, you know, people disappeared, people were being killed. And so one day he said to me, what will happen when we die? And I said, well, I don't know, but let's ask our Father who has answers to everything. And so in the morning we went to him and he said, Papi, what will happen when we die? And my father said, well, if you have children, you will live on in your children. And this 12-year-old boy said, but what if I die before I have any children? And my father said, whatever you have done, somebody will remember. We are all links in a big chain which goes from generation to generation. Nothing is lost. And, well, sort of he accepted that. But this is why I'm so happy that I have the painting and can show them. They've been, I donated them actually to the Resistance Museum in Amsterdam a few years ago. Those are copies, but nowadays you can do beautiful copies. They're just as nice as the originals. And they've just actually been in America, and I just got them back a couple of weeks ago. And as well, the book The Promise is as well about him, and as well in hiding he wrote many, many poems, but they're all in Dutch, and again many, many very sad, many about death. And I was now recently in Amsterdam, and there was a Christian man who had done research, and he found the names of 18,000 Jewish children who were deported from Holland and died. And he got all the names, and from most of them he got pictures, and he found out on which transport they went. There were over 1,000 transport going from Holland to the east to the death camps. And this exhibition is in the States archives, and it is on very, very long tables like a train. And all the names of all those 18,000 children with pictures, with dates, when they were deported, where they ended up, where they were killed. And there were thousands of Dutch people visiting this and studying all this. So, you know, in Holland, at the same time in Holland was in the Nieuwe Kerk on the Dam, a big exhibition about Judaism. And again, we went there, and I was amazed. It was very, very full with school parties, with old people, with young people, all really very, very interested in Judaism.
Can I ask, who is that lady? It's blocked by the speaker.
That is Mamasa, because my father painted as well to keep my father company. And he was a businessman. He had never done anything like that, and obviously he had as well a talent. It's a very, very good likeness.
And how did you feel? When were they actually discovered, these paintings, and how did you feel when they were discovered?
Well, when Otto Frank got the diary, and that gave him really hope, you know, and he felt Anne wasn't forgotten, then, you know, through all this what had happened, I'd forgotten about the paintings who were hidden. And then I said to my mother, we must go and get the paintings. But we were very scared to go to this house where this woman who had really blackmailed my father and brother, through her all this happened to us. So we were reluctant really to go there, but eventually we said, well, we have to go. And we went there, and luckily she wasn't there anymore. Other people, there was a young couple living there. They didn't believe that something was hidden behind their floorboards, but eventually they let us in, and they were indeed there. And on top of it was a piece of paper, quite oily because he put it on the oil paint, and it said, this belongs to Eric and Heinz Geiringer, and after the war we are going to come and pick it up again. Well, this was, you know, a very, very sad moment. But on the other hand, I'm of course very, very happy that I've got them and that I can share them with many, many people.
How does it make you feel when you see how small, in effect, the Jewish communities have become in the countries in which you lived, Vienna, Holland, etc.?
Well, you know, that's very, very sad. And very often when I travel a lot to America, and you have synagogues with 3,000 people, and you know, I said, well, Hitler didn't succeed. we are still, many Jews are still around. And I think in Germany now as well, there's quite a big Jewish community, not Germans, mainly Russians. But, you know, we are getting back to slowly to our numbers, even in Europe.
So on that point, tonight, of course, being Yom HaShoah, when we remember all the many who perished in the Holocaust, and yet, unfortunately, the world today has its fair share of Holocaust deniers. How does that make you feel?
Well, you know, I think those are just Nazis. I can't take anybody like that serious because there's so much proof. And personally, nobody has confronted me with it, but I personally think we should just ignore them because they just want to draw attention to themselves, and, you know, I don't think anybody in their right mind can really believe it hasn't happened, because the Germans themselves took make lists of everything, at photos, all the photos you see in books about the death camps, and were taken by Germans. So, you know, it is there and people do know.
And does it concern you, the apparent current trends in Europe, the seeming rise of anti-Semitism? To put the question very bluntly, do you think it could ever happen again?
Not on such a scale, definitely not. And of course, you know, I do say it as well. I speak in schools where there are a lot of Muslims in the inner city, sometimes 90% of Muslim children. And they ask me sometimes about Israel. And I said, you know, we do need our own country, because if ever anything like this happens again, we are not dependent on other people to give us a home. We have our own country. So I'm convinced we have to keep this, we have to fight for it, and it will be ours. And I tell that, you know, to the Muslim children, and they accept it in a way. They're very ignorant about the facts, they just hear their own propaganda. And but, you know, it's so, it can't happen again because we have now an outlet. And there are so many French people who buy apartments in Israel just in case.
There are, of course, far fewer survivors in the world today to offer the living testimony. Do you think enough is being done to keep the memory alive, to educate the next generation?
This is very important, that it's you young people who have to carry on the story when we are not here anymore. That is very important.
And you, of course, yourself wrote the book Eva's Story, the book The Promise. You cooperated in a play, And Then They Came for Me. Is enough generally being done by society in Europe, perhaps even in America, to promote Holocaust education, to teach the world tolerance, or perhaps what more do you think can be done?
I think it's more than ever now. It's peculiar, you know. Many people thought after 2000 many other things will happen and the Holocaust will be pushed aside. But I think it is even more taught now, and people are more interested. There are many faculties in universities where people study the Holocaust. I've just come back from America and met 3 young people who are going to study Holocaust studies and want to become teachers, not Jewish people, teachers of Holocaust. I think, you know, it will be kept alive for many generations, because it was a unique happening, and, you know, people are actually, they are fascinated by it, how it could have happened, and that is something we still can't really understand, how it was possible, especially in Germany, who was an educated people, and where the Jewish people have had freedom for 50, 60 years, even perhaps longer. So I don't think, I mean, of course incidents will happen, but I don't think ever anything like that will happen.
And you yourself, tell us a bit about that.
Well, I'm a trustee of the Anne Frank Trust, who have exhibitions to go into schools, but as well into prisons. Tuesday I was in a prison in Medway in Kent and spoke to young offenders, and they're very interested. And you know, wherever I go, people are fascinated to hear more about it and are very interested. So I think the story will stay alive.
We've heard before from various youth who took trips to Poland, to the camps. This community, Mill Hill, is going in a few weeks' time for a first ever trip to Poland. How important do you think it is to go back to the camps to capture, to whatever limited extent one can, a glimpse of the past?
Well, the main camp where you still really can see something, of course, is Auschwitz. Most of the other camps is mainly a museum or a memorial, but in Auschwitz you still see the extent. It's huge, and the barbed wire and the watchtowers and the barracks, that is still there. And of course the best is to go in the winter when it's really bleak, because I've seen pictures in the summer when there are trees and flowers and grass, which there was nothing like this when we were there. Not even in summer, not even a bird was singing, because it was death. And I've heard many people who've been, and they say it really changed their lives. When you see it, it makes a big impression on you, how human beings were treated worse than cattle.
So have you been back yourself?
I went back in 1995 when it was the first time there was a memorial service from the Western world, because Poland was not on the Russians anymore, and I did a program with the Dutch television. But it was of course January, and it was terrible, and I'm not going to go back. I know there are Holocaust survivors who take regularly groups there and explain things, but I wouldn't do that. That I couldn't do.
You mean going back?
Going back regularly, yes, no. I've been once, I've seen it. And I've been now as well. In January I was for Holocaust Memorial Day in Moscow, because we want to have the Russians to accept Holocaust Memorial Day as well. And we had a press conference, we had a memorial service, and the Russians too. There was a competition, and children from all over Russia came to listen. And so I think Russia will eventually do that as well, which is great, because and there was as well a man from Rostov and another man from Yad Vashem who is looking for names. Because, like the young people have said, it is very important that every individual is remembered. And Yad Vashem is still looking for about 1.5 million names, which mainly from Russia, where, for instance, in Rostov, whole villages were taken outside and shot. And nobody knows their names. And so they go into those villages to speak to the Christian people. Perhaps there are still some who will remember a Jewish family and can give some names. And they do recover some names, but I think that they left it a little late, and I think many names won't be able to be registered. And this is, like we all say, to have lived and completely disappeared, that is something which shouldn't happen. A name should be remembered. And that is what Anne Frank said as well. When she dies, she would like to live on, and she certainly has succeeded in that.
Eva, what would be your parting message to everybody assembled over here, something we should all take home with us to think about?
Well, there are many messages, but the main thing is really that the Germans were cowardice. Not everybody, by no means agreed with what Hitler was doing, but people didn't have the courage to stand up. And this is something which we are starting to lose as well, because we're starting to be afraid. But this is something we must not be. We must stand up for what we believe is right and help people who are in difficulties because they speak up. And this, I think, is the main thing. And not to have prejudices, because this is, and not to hate, because I tell you that is a very negative feeling. And I have read the other day, teaching in Germany the Holocaust brings out more anti-Semitism. And I thought, that was a headline. And I thought, well, how can that be? And when I read the article, it says, when we teach the Holocaust, we make young people feel guilty. You know, the German people, knowing their grandparents were Nazis, and we tell them what happened in Germany. So if you, shall I explain it? So when you feel guilty about something, you hate the thing what makes you feel guilty. And so you start to dislike the Jewish people who make you feel guilty what has happened. So they say they don't want to stop teaching the Holocaust, but they have to find a different way of teaching it. And I would like to end up, if you haven't got any more questions, to read to you a poem which my brother wrote when he was in hiding. As I said to you, he wrote many, many poems, many quite sad, and they were in Dutch, but I had a few translated, and I'd like to read this to you. Don't cry, Mama. Mama, do I have to die already? I heard the doctor say so. Please, Mama, don't cry. Heaven is such a beautiful place, and soon we'll be together again. Mama, what will my little sister say when she wants to play with me again? Please, Mama, don't cry. After all, I'll be seeing Dad again. He's been waiting up there so long already. Remember to take good care of the kitten. She loves me so. Please, Mama, don't cry. Do you still love me as much as ever? Are you still with me? Please tell me, Mama. The worst of it is that you'll be gone so long. Please, Mama, don't cry. There's sure to be a window up there for me to watch you through. Please hold my hand for just a minute. It seems so misty in the room. Please, Mama, don't cry. Mama, just one more thing. Please kiss me goodbye.